Thank you, Dina, for offering this space, for doing this presentation. Thank you, everybody, for coming. So, as I was saying, this title was the title of my research before I arrived here. So, there's a lot of uncertainty right now in the moment I am in the research. So I will share it with you because I think it's part of it. But initially, what I wanted to work on are the grassroots initiatives in Lebanon. Later on, I was calling them more urban social movements, or the role of like civil society, and what role can it play in the production of the city. So I am in my second year of the PhD, and this is part of my PhD research. I will most probably not do a dissertation. I will write 3 articles, most probably. That's the plan. Right now, I'm in the fieldwork phase, so I am like in the middle. I'm very disoriented, and this is not to say I'm sorry, but like to share it with you because it's part of it. And I have several unresolved issues. I didn't try to resolve them because I don't think I'm in the moment right now to resolve them, mainly around terminologies, which terminologies to use and why, the case studies, and what exactly will be my focus. I will share with you in which moment I am. But before I start, and while preparing for this presentation, I was very overwhelmed by what was happening this week. And I thought of sharing with you what happened this week in relation to the issue I'm studying. So we'll start by Saturday. Many of the events you would have participated in them or organized them, or you know about them, but I will still share them with you. So Saturday morning, a workshop of Beirut Madinati, thinking about the situation Beirut is in today after 1 year of the election of the new municipalities. Saturday afternoon, a protest in front of Hajj Beirut to object the continuous reduction of the size of Hajj Beirut, and Sunday, Delhi, as part of the Heritage Watch Day. Monday, Public Works, in collaboration with the Social Justice in the City and IFI, organized a workshop around housing in Beirut. Tuesday, also, the Social Justice in the City organized a debate around housing and the struggle for social injustice in the city. Tuesday afternoon, Hariri makes his big statement of discourse of Ramadan, which is an important discourse, and the main headlines are around Hajj Beirut and Raml al-Waida, and how they are and will remain public spaces and green and to the Beirutis, etc. Wednesday, the response of Nahnu to the discourse of Hariri, insisting on the issues like denying what Hariri was saying, and also questioning the relationship between the central authority and the local authority, the municipality, and between like the double role of Hariri as a prime minister and a head of a party. And Wednesday afternoon, a fundraising event for Save Beirut Heritage. So this was just from Saturday to Wednesday. Sorry, there's one more thing. So Wednesday also, Amel Association with the Housing and Land Rights Network and the City Alliance launched a project called the Sanctuary of Beirut, and they launched the treaty of a draft for the Treaty of the Right to the City in Beirut, for asking for feedback. So all this happened from Saturday to Wednesday. So all this contributes to my uncertainty and my feeling of being overwhelmed. But also I thought that this was very illustrative of the moment that we are living right now in Beirut in relation to these issues. So in just these events of less than a week, you can see all the different actors, or most of the actors involved in some movement around the right to the city in Beirut, which are social movements, NGOs, academics, political parties, institutions, international organizations, and entrepreneurs. the different issues that are being tackled: public space, local governance, heritage, housing, participation, right to the city, and public policy, and the different tools that are being used, like protest workshops, blah, blah, you can see it. So this was, I wanted to start with this before starting like more systematically what I have been, like where I'm coming from and the moment I am in right now. So coming back to the beginning, my initial aim was to study these, whatever I'm going to call them. I mean, the actions that are happening in Beirut, reclaiming the right to the city, and the contribution that these actions have in creating a more just city based on the concept of the right to the city, fostering a transformation in the role played by the citizens in the production and management of the urban, and building the foundation for an urban social movements. So these were my initial aims: understanding what is the contribution of what is happening in these three issues. I'm basing my work in the theories of around urban social movements, the right to the city as a tool for urban social movements, and the planning approach I am taking is based in insurgent planning and the role of civil society as planning agents. So I will just very briefly introduce the three frameworks in case someone is not familiar with one of them. So, urban social movements was introduced by Castells in the 70s and was continuously revisited by him and other scholars. So, as one of the definitions that Castell uses for urban social movement is a conscious collective practice originating in urban issues, able to produce qualitative changes in the urban system, local culture, and political institutions in contradiction to the dominant social interest institutionalized as such at the societal level. So the definition of, many scholars revisited the definition of urban social movements, and appropriated it from one perspective or another. I am interested in seeing one of the, there's a conversation around what would be included and what would not be included in urban social movements, and around analyzing the change that it creates from a restrictive or a generic point of view. So from a restrictive point of view, it would be like more like the impact that urban social movements is the highest level of potential effect of a citizen action, can have the highest level of potential effect, or it can include any and all citizen action irrespective of its actual or potential effect. So in my research, I'm adopting more the generic approach. The right to the city, first introduced by Henri Lefebvre, and a key concept of the right to the city is the perception of the city as a collective oeuvre in which the residents, its inhabitants, whomever is in the city is participating in shaping it and appropriating the space, the public life and the space of the city. So the use value of the space is more important than the economic value, because the appropriation is more important than domination for Lefebvre. So also the concept has been appropriated in different ways, revisited, and there are two directions in using the right, basing the work in the concept of the right to the city. One is more about creating a radically different urban society, and another is about individually enforceable rights, which is more appropriated by UN agencies and NGOs. So in my case, what I want to study is like something that is hybrid between the two, like any movement that is working on the right to the city, even if they're not using the term right to the city, and they can be working from a more reformist perspective or more radical perspective, but I feel that to understand what is happening, we need to understand both of them. my planning approach, I mean, I want to see, to observe these actions as part of the insurgent planning school. For me, it's why it's very important is that mostly because, okay, so insurgent planning is about all actions that challenge the status quo and the values imposed by the neoliberal logic and claims the right to the city. The interesting thing for me is that to see that insurgent planning doesn't have to come as a one time, like to be very radical and very have a vision of the whole city, but they are small interventions that together with the accumulation can lead to a change in the, can lead to some practice of radical planning. So the accumulation of these experiences for me is key, even if they don't seem as radical as. Okay, so my objectives were to analyze the panorama of these actions and to see, mainly to study the tools that are being used, the structure and modes of organizations, their values and norms, their relation with the institution, the negotiations or the confrontation, and the role played by the different actors and stakeholders in the projects they are doing, and the role played by the affected community in the decision making. So my main questions were, to answer these objectives, were mainly, can civil society succeed in imposing the right to the city in a context such as the Lebanese one? What are the challenges? What are the obstacles? What type of organizations and collectives they are using? How are these collectives started? Which structures are they using? Which are the divisions and fragmentation that are inside these movements, and what factors contribute to them? And could this organization contribute to the creation of an urban social movement around issues related to the right to the city? So I have been, like, part of my methodology in the beginning. My plan was to take specific case studies and to participate actively in some groups and to use the participatory action research as one of the tools of analysis. I didn't end up using, right now, until now, I'm not doing the participatory action research. I am participating in some of the groups, but I'm not participating as a researcher yet. So, I am doing in-depth interviews with activists from many campaigns and projects. So, there is an overlap between the groups and the campaigns and projects. Some of the groups I have participated in, others I have interviewed people from them. I just wanted to leave the the list of projects, but not to enter in detail right now. So now I will share with you some of the initial observations that I have. They are just very raw. And then I will tell you about what are the possible directions I'm thinking of going in, so that I can have your feedback on that. So the initial observations on the hopeful side, the accumulation of work that has been happening in the last years is leading to first the urban issue proving itself as a powerful cause to gather people around it, and this I heard it from many interviewers, that it's much easier to work on something related to the city than to work on something less concrete. So the fact that it's a concrete issue where people can easily agree on, even if they come from different backgrounds or from different profiles, make it easier for people to mobilize around issues related to the city. There is an evolving discourse on the right to the city. The demands that are related to the city are becoming much more concrete, or to the city in general are becoming much more concrete, and in comparison with other movements, they have more clear demands that people are using to argue about. There is more collaboration between different groups coming from different ideologies or perspectives. And there's more consciousness about the need to work along with the affected communities. There is more attention to the power dynamics inside these movements. And there are some successful results, which give like spaces of hope. And lately also there are, you can see some new coalitions being born of initiatives working on common issues that are like more, that go across or like more along in different areas in Lebanon, or people working in different groups. For example, in Tripoli, one commission for following up the projects of all the projects of the municipality. So there are structures being created for people to work together from different areas. On the less hopeful side, the challenges, the main challenges that I saw that are being faced, which are also, I mean, they are, later on when I was seeing them, I was realizing they are like very common, not only in these cases, not only in urban social movements, but in social movements in general. So the divides and difficulty in collaborations between people working on similar issues are there. In some cases, when there is an urgent issue, you see them disappear a bit, but they research when there is something, research is a Spanish word, when there is something, when it's not urgent anymore, you can see them stronger. There are a few activists who play a central role, and this you can see it from the actions of the first week, for example, this week. So the same people are involved in different initiatives, and this, from one side, it creates a sort of concentration of power and a risk of burning out. On the second hand, it is a reason and a cause for the lack of participation of newcomers, because the people who are empowered in these roles can be intimidating for newcomers. At the same time, people remain in these roles because there are no newcomers. The economic sustainability of the lives of these people is a problem, because they dedicate most of their time to this activism, so they are not able to, so they might disappear at any point because they need money, and then the projects can disappear for that. And there is criminalization of these activists in some, not all of them, but in some cases, and in some cases threats to their personal security. In addition to that, but also related, there is a conflict between the professional and the activist, but this is like an internal conflict among activists who are very dedicating a lot of their time for the activism, between their professional side and their activist side. And there is, although there is a will and consciousness about the importance of fighting in partnership with the people affected communities, there is still a domination of the approach of fighting on behalf of people. So these are the initial observations. I have, while working, there are new questions and concerns that are arising that will maybe direct my future research. Part of it is related to the role of research, because I was seeing that it was, in some cases, the research was very important to maintain, because the activism goes up and down, but research is something that is more continuous. So it is very important to maintain like to link actions together and to. So I'm interested in understanding how can we have more research, more engaged research that can contribute really to the urban social movements, and how can the research be based in the needs that are coming from these social movements. And another issue is related to the role of the experts. And this, I saw it mainly in comparing between Beirut, what's happening in Beirut and what's happening in Tripoli. So you see the experts are much more present in Beirut, not only as experts, but as activist experts than in Tripoli. And then you see the results are quite different. So I'm interested in looking at that also from a planning perspective as the role of the planner in this case. And to see like how the degree of centrality or not of the role of the expert is affecting the process. One of the, as part of like when I was looking at case studies, seeing that there are so many, I don't know which are the case studies I want to focus on. But I was always triggered with, okay, how can we evaluate what is the result of this case study? So I was thinking of some parameters to be able to evaluate the impact of these initiatives. The few things I thought about was like evaluate its impact on the public, on the change on the public discourse, and people's perspective on some issues. So for every issue, for every point, I would use a different tool to analyze, to understand and analyze that. No, so the change in the public discourse and people's perspective on specific issues, in the attitude of authority, the end result, and the mobilizations around the issue. Because I want to analyze the impact of the case studies, not basing on the end result, but on the process. But what is that really? So in that process, I thought of these parameters. So maybe this could be one direction, because my research will be, the end product will be probably articles, academic articles, but I'm also interested in using the research to inform the practice in these urban social movements. So maybe this could be a tool that could be useful for social movements to understand what is being changed by their work. And another possible directions which I'm attracted to is, because I'm always when working in that is I'm faced with like the issue of, am I working on issues or am I working on the work of people, no? And it's both. So I am interested in doing some work on the trajectory of specific activists, because there are specific activists who have been active in several projects. So there is a line that links these projects together, but there's also what's happening on the personal and political level to each of these activists. So I'm interested in, I'm very attracted to this idea also from linking the personal to the political from a feminist perspective, and to understand through these activists like what is happening in the city in this scale. And this, I think, for me, maybe it's a way to find a place from which to hold the research, no? Because it's too dispersed and I need some line of thought. So I thought about this one. So I'm sharing with you possibilities to have your feedback, and thank you.
ما بنتكلمش بقالنا 3 أشهر ليه؟ انتوا بتعملوا بالظبط اللي بنعمله. I think I suggest that we go into a discussion. and helping Rana that doesn't seem to need a lot of help. Crystallizing what she will be doing in the coming 2 months or so.
Well,
or
more. Or 2 years or 3 years of my life, yeah.
A long life.
طبعا our hosts.
I have many questions. Can I?
انت مش host.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
سيبي ضيوف الأول ياكلوا
I'm
شوكولاتة.
so excited.
It's nice actually because when you get sometimes we play too much professors, so it's kind of nice to have the peers throw in. I mean, I'm happy to start, but
Sorry, I didn't.
لا لا
jump in. I got
I-
too excited there.
I'm sorry I did that to you.
No,
اتفضلي.
it's fine.
خلاص ما هي she doesn't want.
We're being filmed too. Okay.
The conflicts.
Make sure you say your question very articulate. I know. Because no pressure here. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, and I can't wait to read the 3 articles you mentioned. So it's not a dissertation anymore. So one of the questions I kind of wanted to ask at the end, but I guess I'll start it because I started with that comment, is do you have an idea what do you want to write for those 3 articles, or is that what you're expected to do now that you're not writing a dissertation? So that's the first question. And then going on from there, I mean, the first question that came to me when you were presenting was I wanted to know what civil society meant for you, because you put it in the title and you mentioned it throughout, but I don't know what that means for you, and nor for the activists or the urban social movements or the groups that you're working with. So that's kind of 2 questions. I have a lot of other questions, but I won't hog the camera. Yeah, so thanks for now.
That's part of the things I wanted to avoid, deciding what civil society means to me, because for me, I think, because I'm struggling with the terminology and I decided to leave this apart. That's why I was saying that I used the civil society at some point, but actually maybe it's not civil society, maybe it's, but yeah. So, but for me, regardless of which term I'm using, what I want to see is the contribution of all those actors, all those different actors. Okay, so obviously not the the institutions and the political parties in the power are from one side, but I want to see the contribution of social movements, of NGOs which are not compliant, like, because there are compliant NGOs and not compliant NGOs, so NGOs which are entering in confrontation with the authorities, academics which are doing engaged academia, entrepreneurs, international organizations. I wouldn't consider it as part, but in some cases it will be like some work would be like I don't want to exclude big categories from looking at the picture, because I think I needed to see the big picture of what's happening. But that's why I don't know which term to use, because it's not really civil society. It's more complex than that.
You don't have to answer the first question about the 3 articles.
No, the 3 articles, that's part of what I wanted to get from your feedback also. Like the directions that I'm mentioning can be like I know that I'm going to work for an article to which I'm presenting in Leeds with Mona and Mona, related to the research, the role of the researcher. Okay, ما في mouse راح. No, the research. How can we produce more engaged research? What is the role of the universities in helping producing more? So this is one line of that interests me, and I think that I'm going to work on an article on that. And the other 2 directions that I was mentioning can be for 2 different articles. So, yeah.
you know, on this issue, I remember when I was writing my dissertation, I decided at one point that I wanted to do 3 papers. And I went to my advisor and I said, "Khalas, I want to do 3 papers. I don't want to do a thesis." And he said, "Well, let's talk." And he put 3 things on the table. And I think the 3 are the way to decide. The first one, he told me at the end, "You look like you want to do a dissertation light. Go write a dissertation. You're trying to run away from writing the whole document, and you're suddenly feeling like I'll write 3 chapters and it's more contained." So I think this is one danger, that sometimes people will say, "I want to write the 3 papers because I'm intimidated." But there are very, very good reasons for writing 3 papers and not a dissertation. The first one, and the most clear one, is if you're not planning a career in academia. You don't need a dissertation if you're not writing. You're not going to write a book. You're better off placing yourself in whatever other non-academic community you're trying to place yourself in. It's going to be a world of research centers, consultancy places. So you write in a way where you target where these people write, and you get known and you enter through a job. So that's one reason. The second reason is if you're really tackling 3 topics that are not necessarily comparable, but that are bringing in, still allow you to bring in something that has a coherence, because at the end of the day it's a PhD, so it is contributing to a body of knowledge, but they are sufficiently far from each other. You're doing 3 case studies and actually they end up not being comparable. So then you go in depth in every one and you don't compare apples and oranges unless it's useful to compare apples and oranges. So that's the second reason. So for him, it was like, you're working in the informal settlements of Beirut, you're working on actors, all of them are connected to somehow the same geography. There's absolutely no reason to do this, particularly because you want a career in academia. And I think that this is something to consider. And getting in academia tactically is getting harder and harder by the day. So having your book project while you're a student is going to be easier than doing it in any other, ask me, ask anyone, any other time in your life. So that's why I would say that what I'm seeing here is more a book project than it is 3 papers. But that may change. It depends what you go, but what I'm seeing here has a coherence of something that can be one project. So you can write every chapter thinking that this will go a paper here, this will go a paper here, but you can still force yourself to think about the theoretical intersections between them. And I mean, as you move along, you can keep the flexibility, but I would suggest that you don't decide too quickly, but you keep in mind that if you want to be in academia, you're more likely to need a dissertation.
It's an advice.
Yeah, of course.
And it's clearly doable. I mean,
Yeah, the thing is, probably it's because I don't see myself on the long term in academia. That's why it was easier for me to think about this option. But I'm flexible also to really think about it, and I think I really think about it a lot before finishing this.
I think, I don't know, my hunch is that you don't have enough critical distance to decide what you want to do now.
Yes.
So I would postpone the decision of book 3 articles until I take stock much more from what I have. And I think you have a lot. And I got scared at the end much more because you're opening up more than focusing. And so I think, it's perfectly normal. It's a stage where you're in the field, a lot is happening. I really like how you opened it. It just gives us a snapshot of how much is happening on a daily basis and with such intensity. So it's very normal to be where you are now and where you have no idea how you're going to grasp all this. I think it will be much better if you leave. If you say, I'm stopping fieldwork, khalas. Whatever happens from now on, as interesting as it is not going to be part of my data. And it's a very conscious decision to make because especially with everything that's happening now in this sphere of ours, a lot is happening. So I think you need to be super disciplined and try to say, I'm stopping, I'm taking stock of it. If I follow it, it won't be as a PhD researcher. Try to have that critical distance because I really feel that you need to see it with almost like a cold eye after you forget about it for a month or so, if you can. Just detach yourself. And I took notes. I don't. Sorry if it's going to seem. I apologize too. Still, so I'm so sorry. It's going to feel a bit messy. But I think the hinge for me would be to go back to your research question slide, which I think is still weak. I think it might be dated. I don't know. Maybe this is something we wrote long time ago. And I think these sets of questions are too descriptive. They're all what and yes, no questions. And I think you have elements that go much beyond them. Much, much beyond them. So I would encourage you to try to rethink of 2 research questions or 3 that are more beginning with a how or why rather than the what. You have all the answers to this. I mean, all your presentation are answers to this. So you know a lot. You are able to describe thoroughly the actors, the activists, everything. You have a lot to tell us. So all this, you have it. What's much more interesting is to understand more like how is it happening, the questions more about the forms and which are not here really. I think they're in other places where it's like what are the forms this is taken, what tools. I think this one, the 4 columns, is a very good slide. This is where I would derive my questions from. I think it's the 4 columns you showed us. One on tools, one on actors, one on issues. Yes, this one. I think this, like, who are the actors? That's a very good question. What are the issues? Yes, how they integrate or not. And what are the tools? These are good questions. And each one can be almost a paper or a chapter. I mean, then you can decide. I have 4 papers, that means a book. I have 3 papers, that means 3 papers. This is why I'm telling you, postpone that question once you take stock of what you have. So I would encourage you to think more about the key question and always keep in mind that what you're doing is documenting something happening now, which is very difficult. That the fact that you're in the now and that it's very difficult to take stock of and go very far. So you're documenting the process. That's a main contribution. You're helping us understand what's happening. And the other thing, what would your thesis or your papers do is analyze trends. Are these actors, what do they have in common? Are there certain types, categories I can derive? What's happening on key issues of, like, I don't know, gender, age, income groups, geography, stuff like this. The issues, I think you already are focusing on issues of cities and urbanity. So you already have that focus. And that can be like, what are the salient issues under the city that's coming out? What is left out? Always think about what's not there also. What is it not? Why is it not there? Why are people doing this? On local governance, ما في كتير. It's much thinner. And try to understand how come we have this. Is it related to the profiles of the activists themselves? What are they trained in? Then you have relationships that come and the questions become more interesting. And if you write about it, it will come up with more. And the tools is super interesting. What I would add is the form of the organization, an institution, an NGO. I think this is crucial. This is part of the debate activists are discussing. Should we organize in an NGO, a non-profit? I don't know what's the best form of organization.
A political party.
A party. I think this is also, I would add it to tools. It's not only what we do, it's also who are we? Membership issues, who is in, who is out. These issues I think are interesting also to bring. So in my list of themes, what I have is one on actors, or what I call more the participants and their networks. And I think this goes back to what you said at the end. I'm interested in tracing some profiles. In that category, I think you can do this. This becomes a methodology issue, that you extract maybe some profiles that seem to you very interesting, and you observe, like, this particular person, their trajectory, how did they start, where they are now, how it impacts their lives, their professional life, their social lives. And then it becomes more like vignettes rather than becoming like the whole organization structure. But it's more about participants, and in participants you have these profiles, in-depth, where you go back to these people and you understand, you do in-depth sociological interviewings. Then you go back to your fieldwork with targets. I'm missing information on this, so you're not just documenting for the sake of documenting. Forms and tools, I think, are very important. And then what you have on, what are the impacts of all this? And the impacts, as you said, you showed it in your 2 slides, there are hopeful stuff and there are more challenges. I think you already identified a lot of things there that you can discuss in what is it all doing to the city, to actors, to groups. You can organize it better as you write it, I'm sure. I'm not too worried about this. The evaluation of impact scared me a bit. I felt this, I like what you're trying to do, but I think the scope is huge. I would encourage you to think about one entry point, maybe the media. I don't know, my hunch would be media and social media, not only media, written media, but also try through the tools, maybe you focus on how there's a new, I don't know, network of journalists that's helping the urban activists or to advance their claims. And then this becomes like a way to measure impact. You have much more articles. And then you have to, because it's a lot of work, because you need a baseline to say, to measure impact. What was happening before? When is the before? And then it becomes a lot of work. And are you going to, I don't know, take, يعني أي newspaper بعدها موجودة من 15 سنة لهلا, and then you're going to look at it and say there was nothing on cities, and then مثلا after the creation of نحن we start seeing few things, and then the creation of نحن is a date that is interesting for you, and then it's an exploration on its own. And this is just for media. Imagine if you're doing it and the survey and scary. Leave something for after the PhD.
Yeah,
it's another project.
This also scares me a lot. I put it as a future thing, but as one direction, but maybe not for me. Probably not for now.
Right, I agree. Yeah. So we agree if it's that. Then I think at the end you don't talk much about research and action, but it's embedded there, yani action and research and action. I think this needs to come in the framework somewhere. It's very, you've been involved in that earlier, so I think it's interesting to, when you're talking about the expert and the role on Higgs, so I think action and research might be an interesting way to reflect also on your positionality.
Yeah.
And I think when you talked about research and activism, and I think you were talking about temporality, how it all has a temporality to it. Sometimes it's about action, and sometimes it's about the research. And I think this dynamics between action and research is very interesting to explore. There are times where it's not time to go on the street or have a public presence, and where we're maybe burned out, just trying to recharge. But it doesn't mean that it's dormant. يعني بيرجع بيقلع أو حدا بيقلع. So I think there's something really interesting there in the temporality, especially with women and feminist agendas and all this. في cycles that are, when you're talking about the sociology of the activists, and you have in mind these women that you want to trace.
I didn't say women, but I have in mind women.
You just look around. These are spaces that are dominated by a lot of anyway, all the gender dimension of it. There's something to be done there, and the temporality of it I think is super interesting. وهيك كيف انه sometimes في حدا بيفوت وحدا بيظهر وحدا تاني بيفوت وحدا بيظهر برجع في حدا ارتاح رجع اجا. So there's this, it's something really nice to trace if you can. Given you've been here for some time, if you're able to reflect on that somewhere. But I think it's super, it's great. There's so much food for thought. It's a very needed research, really needed that someone is reflecting on this and writing it up. And I think you have a lot. So I think it's time to stop, just take stock of it all and decide where it can go. I think it can go into multiple possibilities. So I agree with Mona. It has the potential of a book. It's up to you to decide if you want to do it now or later, if you want to use the dissertation to do it now, or just write a section of it through 3 papers, publish them separately. It becomes a strategy more than...
بدك نحكي بعد؟ You don't want to answer?
فيني أحكي شيء؟
إيه أكيد please.
أنا I was very happily surprised, and I'm not at all an urban social movement person, but I am a social movement person. And I see a very nice frame, even a very sophisticated nice frame, if you are working on urban social movement as a form of social movements, of new social movements. I saw a very intended way of dismissing the city as a space of power struggle. You didn't talk about that at all. I didn't see it. And this is, for me, is transcending the structural approach to social movements. And it says a lot. And maybe you should work on yourself to spell it out. But you have the whole story can be started from the city as a space of injustice or of power struggle. And you have another story that is always here in each slide, which is the building of the cause, what we call the framing processes. You have, and what we call in French, la construction des problèmes publics, the construction of a public problem. You have it all over, and with the groups, the campaigns, the issues, the tools, etc. And you know this very anecdotal story about the drunk driver to help people be aware and to build a social movement around the speed driving. People and organizers have to put in place such a fantasy called the drunk driver, who would kill your son or your kids or yourself, etc. So this framing processes can be a framing alienation, framing dissemination, etc. And it's there. And you have a third optical or lens through which you were, as Mona Harb has said, the mobilization and the organization. And you see the burnout, the one-man show, the intimidation, the segmentation, and as well the competition over resources, over visibility, etc. So you have the same story that you can tell starting from the mobilization/organization. And for once, and I'm really grateful for you, you are starting from activists. So you are assuming that the activist can be an entry point to narrate how this spectrum could lead to a social movement that we can call an urban social movement. Because, you know, Castell is a Turan student and he thinks about many social movements that would gather together and evolve to bring a social movement with a big A. So if I were you, I would totally write 4 chapters, and this will be the thesis, and this thesis will be an answer, because it is a reflection of the current debate in social movements. Should we talk about the configuration as we call it, or should we talk about the cause building, or should we concentrate on the mobilization cycle and the organizational form, or we should talk about the activists, because the activists have their own biographical experiences and their previous experiences and their way, and they are coming from الحزب الشيوعي, منظمة العمل, Trotskyist, even neoliberal architects. These people don't come as a white paper. They come with their own know-how. So they are trying to take the blanket towards themselves. And in fact, this transcends your own concern about Beirut or about the urban space in Beirut. Would it be a fertile environment to build an urban social movement? It is a discussion of the 4 lens that are competing about social movement today worldwide, not in Lebanon. And this is, for me, is the excellent thesis, which is deconstructing an object by saying the same object can be studied this way and this way. What I didn't like, really, but maybe this is my Francophone side, is the impact. Why the hell you are so interested in the impact? We study social movements to
Impact.
yes,
To measure the
يعني you have all this capacity to see what is the public interest, what is the public sphere, what is the public, la chose publique, and all of a sudden you restrain yourself to identify impact. Impact on what? On people? On policies? On debate? And is it something that is as tangible and as mustamir, as constant, as the other things that we are talking about, which is framing the question, the structure of the competition, the activist know-how and previous experiences, the cycle of mobilization and of organization? Maybe the impact for me would be the question of the expert and not the question of a scholar who wants to see to what extent there is a fertile venue for the building of a social urban movement in Beirut today, with this four entry point. But really, I liked it very much, and I didn't saw all the sociological background coming through. Thank you.
Rana, I'd like to also building off of what Dina just said, something that was coming up when you were talking, I was thinking about, also in this question I was focusing on different actors, is the question of intellectual, you raised the question of the two different ways of thinking of urban social movements, right? There are more than two different ways actually, but you've put them in two different camps. And I was starting to think, since I thought a lot about those theoretical debates as a geographer, what are the implications of someone taking the translation of, for example, Lefebvre's ideas, and what is the implications of someone actually trying to think about what does it mean to actually explode the idea of difference and to make a movement that is about this, that's about like deepening it and not really just about the right to the city, which is the right to live in the city and work in the city, right? Which I think is more than, which is why I'm saying I think it's more than just the UN and the theorists. But I wonder also about this question which Dina raises about thinking of people's intellectual trajectories and the influences. I think this is so interesting because I don't think people do this a lot. And I think here it's especially, I remember when I was doing my undergraduate work and I was working on Ecuador, and you would read the way that the literature was, and they would act as if the social movements of the 1990s did not come out of the communist parties, had no relationship to Cuba, had no relationship to anything, as if they had just appeared from nowhere. And so, I know because I'm also sort of a historian, this is always the thing I say maybe, but that I think that this is really interesting to think like, what is the framework, what is the conceptual framework, I'm not sure exactly how you think about this, that people are adopting, and does it differ between these different, I remember what's your first category, actors? Like where is the line and how much does that influence, again, the other questions that you have in the end, which are
Issues and tools.
And the challenges and how much people, what are their tools that they choose, and then how much is this dominated by a few certain personalities, and where does that trajectory come from? And is there a counter trajectory to it that's saying like, no, if we really want an urban social, if we want not even an urban, I don't really like the term urban social, if we want a social movement that is effective, then actually it has to be more inclusive, it has to be more democratic, it has to
You don't
be
like
more.
what words?
Urban, I find it so funny that what about the rural social movements? And what about the non-urban? So the sort of obsession with the urban, which.
No, it's interesting. I keep wondering, like, at the end, what kind of a thesis do you want to do? Where do you want to contribute? And here I'm like being the scholar. But if you're interested in the fact that there are some ingredients of everyday urban livelihood, like green space, like pedestrian infrastructures, like clean air, like clean water, of course, affordable housing, and
Direct
others,
education.
then forget those. So see, this you get into something else. It's not what you had just here.
It's not here, right?
Exactly.
It's not in the
So
framework of urban social
this is
movement.
where it's interesting, because what then you're doing is you're showing, and I think it is fascinating what's happening in Lebanon, and I have no idea, and I love the fact that Rana has been involved in social movements also in Spain and needs to kind of bring these, because Saad al-Hariri's speech last week is fascinating. Saad al-Hariri went back to talk about what Nahnu and Medinati and everybody else is talking about. And it's amazing. He even limited the frame of his conversation to administrative Beirut. We're like writing the response now. It's like, you're crazy, man. Who do you think you are? Like, you're the prime minister. You're not the mayor of a city, and your boundaries are bounded so small. So what this tells you is that he somehow has stupid or intelligent advisors who are telling him that the urban, and he's not talking about violence against women, but Kafa is doing a fantastic job. He's not talking about violence against homosexuals, but there are social movements that are doing fantastic work on the issue. He's not talking about child labor. There are groups that are doing great work on this, and we can go on. Women, battered women, they disappeared. He's picking these. So what is it that is making this topic somehow at some point become such an important issue that it's gaining space in the realm of the elections? What we proved, I think, with Beirut Medinati is that the topic has currency. It resonates with people. Is it common? Is this what's happening in Spain? Is this? I mean, we saw this with Podemos at some level, right? In Italy, in Greece. So I'm kind of interested in this issue of like how the urban becomes not a space, just like Dina said, but rather an ingredient for making claims forward. For political claims, for formulating political claims. And I think,
it's a venue, like any other.
And then your interest in media becomes fascinating, because one can start using this very systematically as a scientific project to show at what point how many articles every day come out in the press, how many talk shows bring this. It's
social media conversations.
But also, can I jump on this? I have a few questions. I mean, like, and to continue with Muna's question, the first question I had in mind when we were presenting is why these initiatives on the right to the city are coming out now over like the past few years in Lebanon with such focus and intensity. This is the first question. Second, what does the right to the city mean in the particular context of Lebanon? And especially in terms of, a lot has been written since the 1990s about the neoliberal reconstruction of the city, but what we are tackling is going beyond the neoliberal reconstruction, but also, I can think about how this has dismantled the traditional sites of militancy. I'm talking about the labor unions and labor movement in particular. And what I'm thinking about is whether the right to the city is also a struggle over the surplus value, while we have very the union and labor movement are going down, we are seeing the rise of movements over the right to the city. You know what I mean? So is it becoming the struggle, replacing the traditional militancy of the unions over, in particular, the surplus value? When we talk about the right to the housing, for instance, and other social and economic issues,
It's a very crucial question. And my answer to it was in the education. that we had more programs teaching urban planning, urban design, and critical urban studies. You heard me speak about this. This is because when I worked on this a little bit through youth activism. It was like, why now are we seeing the city? And in that sense, if you look at mobilization after the 1990s, after the end of the war, nothing on the city. You had environmental groups. Karam Karam's book documents it beautifully. So you have environmental green groups, and they fail miserably in mobilization because of internal struggles. And this is the first failure of civil society mobilization against the system. And the disability group, this is the book of Paul Kingston, who take other case studies of mobilization, nothing on the urban, nothing on the city. And then suddenly you start seeing these right to the city. I traced it to the initiation of graduate programs in urbanism at the Lebanese University, at Alba, at AUB, at NDU, at LAU.
But it's a funding question also, no? An international priority question, in a way.
But you also have people who become trained to Lefebvre, who read Lefebvre, who have discussions on Lefebvre and pastels in classrooms, and then who form NGOs. This is where tracing is super interesting. The experience of 2006, what happened after the 2006 war, the fact that you have a cluster in Aita al-Sha'ar, and you know this very well. This is, these people who are there, حدا منهم بيروح بيعمل public works,
and the reconstruction of Nahr al-Barid,
and then they go back to Saida, but this is very interesting. It starts from a group of professors at AUB who are interested in this, who you see again, بترجع بتشوفي حبيب دلس ومنى فواز وهويدا حارث. You see these people who've created that task force at the time, where all these people were very young students or young alumni. So there's something about the creation of these programs, the workshops, the seminars that happen. I find it like one possible explanation. I don't think it's the only thing. I think the international organization come, but it's not very trendy.
أنا قصدي ده.
And the charter هلا وصل عنا. The city charter just landed 2 days ago. And
But أنا قصدي that I don't mean that. I don't mean the international organizations like the UN and blah blah blah. I mean actually. I mean two things. I mean the funding for these programs to open at the different universities, it's not a coincidence. They didn't just happen.
We weren't funded.
No, the funding to get more faculty.
لا, the reconstruction went, بس هلا we know.
But the other thing, the thing is that I also think that it's not just here. Like you see this everywhere.
Where everywhere?
Everywhere in the world. That urban studies programs became more. They exploded everywhere. Places where you
don't
have
see it
urban
in
studies
Jordan,
programs.
you don't see it in Egypt, you don't see it very strongly. I'm not sure. I was very curious about it. You don't see it in Indonesia, you don't see it in بالمينا region.
There's not at AUC, there's not an urban studies program?
Not really, not very. It's not as strong as what we have here. So
It's right in the US.
There are mobilizations,
But in the US,
not
at least
funding
I'm
for-
thinking in the US context, there were very few urban studies programs, and now there's one in every university in the US and in England. And I think let's be honest, and this affects AUB. It's an American university, I think also. I'm not saying that this is the one reason, but I think that there is a relation also. And I find it very interesting that
I find it more related to the relationship of faculty members. That مثلا Rana has a relationship with reads stuff about this scholar, invites her here or invites him here. Then we.
You think it's more like an organic thing
It's
that's
more
about
the
the
network.
people that.
But see, that's what I was. That's just the point I was trying to make. Like, what
خلاص
kind
we
of-
stopped talking. Actually,
But I think it's what kind of a thesis you want to write, because it can
Because
be
there's
a
so many
thesis
things.
about leadership. It can be a thesis about the emergence of certain discourses at a particular moment and the relationship between funding and politics and blah blah about it. It can be a thesis about framing claims. It can be a thesis about learning. How does learning and methods actually circulate among people? It can be a thesis in organizational theory, where actually you are at an advantage because you understand as an organizer, as someone who's been in so many of these movements, what makes or breaks a movement. And I know in our conversations that you're very interested in why do people fight when they fight? How does it happen? How do they resolve conflict? When is it possible for conflicts to resolve and when is it not?
Horizontal organization or leaderless organizations.
So it can be anything, but you have to really decide what kind of a thesis ultimately you want it to be, or what kind of frames you want to do. And that's why I feel that at some level having these, but adding to these, or the structure where you had like the causes, the people, it's really the claims. I personally think that if you're going to go this way, you want to ask what kind of frames, what kind of claims are being formulated. And I think that the frames through which the claims are made are very important. And so then it becomes something much more in a traditional sociology kind of a thesis, of sociology of social movements, where the question of framing claims is much more common. And then you ask the question of how does the urban come to be the frame and the product through which so much are actually. And I would imagine that it's true that the university has a role to play. I would imagine there's much more, and we're not really sure where it is and where it's coming from. So it'd be interesting to actually figure this out. But then you want to know, like, what is it I'm trying to do? Because you said I want to be useful to the movement, and maybe what the movements need to know, what we have zero training in, and it's very interesting because I find that there's a whole tradition in Latin America and in the US about organizing, about leadership, and I find myself recently trying to find references and reading a lot about this. We don't have this tradition here. We don't have ولا سولانسكي ولا سيزار تشافيز ولا حدا من هول الناس اللي actually.
ولا حتى Bertha Taylor when the movement failed.
Yes.
How to pick it up again?
Or why do they fail? I mean, you could ask the question the other way around, like Fox Piven, why do they fail?
الحرية structure have nothing.
بس بدك تقرري شو بدك انت. And ultimately, like, how are you going to frame this for the next time? Because I think the landscape you've put to us is beautiful, and it's large, and it's promising, and it's encompassing. So now I think what Mona said makes a lot of sense. Stop and think about how you're going to frame what is the lens you really want to take, and then something's going to take priority. Sorry, I talked so much.
That's a good sign.
I'm gonna. The 2 points I wanted to say are really from my point of view of a researcher and activist in those issues. أول واحدة رح بلش بالتاني لأنه منى mentioned حريري's speech. وأنت you mentioned all these things that are happening, 2 things per day in the last week. I was thinking what would be interesting is to frame those urban social movements or urban whatever you want to call them within the bigger political context. فلما بيحكي الحريري بهالطريقة I'm wondering is it because نحن in Beirut مدينتي and the elections in the municipality and the follow-up, everything that followed up are so powerful that he finds himself already framed in these issues and needs to talk about them? Or is it that in the current political context, he's become so weak that he can talk only about the place where he has power, which is the municipality? No, I don't know if this is naive analysis, because also I'm learning about politics through urban politics, because before I was not familiar in politics at all. And why I'm talking about this is also all those things happening. Is it that we're in a period where a lot of people are in contestation on what's happening? There's a lot of things boiling around regarding the current political system. And therefore, a lot of people are finding it very practical to use urban issues to contest, or is it that really urban issues are talking to people and are really I'm wondering just how to frame the use of urban issues in politics within the larger political context that is here. If the elections, the parliamentary elections, had come before the municipal, had would we have seen such an explosion of urban issues being used for political reasons? I don't know. These are things I'm wondering. Because I'm among those who think that urban issues are a really good start to talk about politics. The other one I had, I'm really curious about what you talked about Tripoli and Beirut, the difference in relation to the presence or absence of experts. And I don't know, I'd like maybe to read more about this. How does the presence of the expert or the researcher play a role in changing the outcomes and learning things from that as a researcher myself, and who's always thinking about what kind of research can I do that can be used by activists.
Thank you,
I think
Rana.
it's a very good question about the parliamentary elections. Because we're now witnessing the explosion of the electoral law this debate. It's a very good question.
It depends what you want to do, but I think you know what you want to do also. I have a feeling, like deep down, you know.
I mean, there are things that I know that I'm not so much, I'm not as interested in doing as I was in the beginning. So there are things that I'm very attracted to right now in this moment, but also I know that I'm like letting myself
Go
with because I'm not taking decisions at this moment. So, and this is also something that I'm enjoying, like not having to make a decision. But that's why your feedback comes straight in this moment because it's like, because there are many possible directions and so many things that you said have been things that are very, like I have been thinking about it and are behind some of the possible directions that I want to take. And yeah, I mean,
the one thing that scares me sometimes is when we're not trained as anthropologists, we can easily dive without really knowing too much about how, in all these determinants of human action, like why do people do the things they do? These are the kinds of questions where I sometimes feel scared as someone not trained as an anthropologist to get into. And I would be careful about really getting there without really reading a lot. I mean, of course, you can train yourself in anything, but then you have to be aware about the fact that is this the kind of direction you want to go? Are you going to end up explaining why did people choose to take this trajectory? Which is a little bit different from when you look at how things are framed or how things are constructed, which
are more sociological questions, like when Rana said, the how is the more interesting thing. And right now, I see that you don't have a preference. Do you go with the activist to explain the story, or do you go with the organization and the crisis and the internal lives, the sociology of organization to make it story, or do you go with much more the mainstreaming that we have witnessed around the issue of the city as a collective cause, as a common cause? And this morning, I'm jumping to explain my idea. I was interviewing Habib Ali, the anthropologist of Tunisia, and in very few words he said, Tunisia for many people are the Jasmine Revolution. For me, it's a Haifa revolution. It is the revolution of the poor. Much of the context are talking about the revolution of the well, of the urban, the educated, etc. I'm talking about another revolution. And at some stage, if you follow your 3 or 4 tracks, city as the 4th track, you will have your own story, one of them. But you will do it through your accumulation, the one that the two models have said you have done already. There is one reading for you that would be more appropriate and more éclairante, enlightening than the three others. But I see very well a book or a thesis talking about, here we go, the story can be narrated with form, but this is the way I will be explaining this specific case of Lebanon and Beirut, and not Beirut and Tripoli, Beirut in opposition to Tripoli in the 90s. And one way to go further in testing which approach you want to adopt, which lens you want to embrace, is to confront Beirut and Tripoli, to see what triggers the differences. Is it the activist? Is it the city? Is it the framing? Is it the mobilization? Is it the existence of other common cause somewhere? Because in social movements as well, when you have many causes, you have bigger chances to build in your cause than when you don't have any cause. I think confronting the two case studies on your own, maybe in an article, would allow you to see where you want to go with your work.
Are you trying to? I'm going back to what you started with. Are you trying to identify if there is an urban social movement in Beirut or in Lebanon today? Is this?
I think the question comes more from an expectation, not mine.
Okay.
I don't think that this is really what I want to focus on,
because that if you don't want to focus on, then I will encourage you not to go back to your initial question on terminology. And I'm not sure the social movement framing is, because it will be misleading to the reader. Are you telling us we have the ingredients for the social movement? What are those? And the literature is. And when I went through it, I was like, I have no idea. It's all happening now. Maybe in 5 years we'll be able to look back and understand what's happening. But when you think the social movement,
I had an article that I want to share with you, written by Hassan, who is a PhD on urban activism in Egypt.
okay.
And she has worked not on the existence of an urban social movement, but on how people coming from very different backgrounds met in a fluid political conjuncture and created the city as a cause.
Interesting.
And Aya Nassar is making her PhD with Hassan at Warwick University. And I have the article because she wrote it under my supervision at the Arab Reform Initiative, and it's on their website.
In that sense, activism might be a much more neutral term for you to play with.
Of course.
And then organizing, collective organizing. When do people come together to organize rather than the social movement theory framing?
Because I'm an adept of working with activists, with the individuals, and not with the
social movement is very different. You know how you say at the end that we're not participating, the activists are speaking on behalf of rather than participating with. And then this accusation that these movements are more elitist, they're more academic, they're not really.
Or monopolizing.
We don't have neighborhoods.
Because we are working to transform the.
Yes, but exactly, we're still in the beginning. At this stage, we're not a social movement. We're a political movement. And I don't know what
Political platform.
And exactly, it's a political platform, a political group.
Mobilizations. We are talking about حركات كثيرة قد تؤدي في النهاية إلى social movement وقد لا تؤدي.
صح. I agree. I totally
قد
agree.
تؤدي إلى cause and gaps.
بس بعدها
لا مش كل حراك movement. الحراك ممكن يبقى مساعد. ممكن يبقى trigger، ممكن يبقى spin off. بس مش لازم كل حراك يبقى يعني حركة لا المحكمة العسكرية. It's not It's not energy, it's a trigger of movement.
How
We see here the components of many triggers and many tools that crystallize the city as a common cause. Maybe not as a common cause, but because there are many definitions of what are the city problems. The grievances of the city are very differently defined. Is it the public spaces on the beaches? Is it the access to services? Is it the lack of service? Is it the newcomers? Is it the migrants? So, if you don't want the framing to take the side, to take the upper, a lot of attention, we need to think that these different
I think framing is a good structuring.
and you have
the social movement. إنه نقولها is this leading to a social movement? No.
predictive research.
لا انت بتحكي الحركات والفريمينج ده في حد ذاته مع الحركات that you have enumerated, just following them and see how each one is explaining the causes of their mobilization is enough to understand that there are three categories of meaning around the city or around the right to the city.
Yeah.
And this would be the third of your one chapter or the third of your thesis. And the profiles of people who are burnt out or monopolizing or representing the public, and the public we should keep the public silent, is another way of describing all the materials that you have.
في كمان بعدين إنه if you feel like expanding differently, to go back to Mary's comment, I would think about the history of where these things come from in terms of the previous discourses, because there's a whole generation of discourses in the early 90s that comes from a more environmentalist perspective. I'm thinking of people like Mirvat Khalil and others who are really like pioneers in the older generation. So sometimes we also fall in the trap of talking about the people we know when we're doing research about our own community. And there is a generation of activists who spoke about the coast, the environment in very different terms, but they also spoke about them as political material. And they come after another generation that had talked about them in even less political terms. So I'm just trying to say that there's a danger, you know how like Soya comes and he talks about spatial turn at one point and kind of depoliticizes, because we were talking about this a couple of days ago, kind of depoliticizes the notion of space and says, but it's all now, it's at the center of things. And I think there's something that could be said about the fact that there's a version of urban light that's picking up a lot, but that every time we come to talk about it in more structural terms, we also fight. So, and that brings about sources of tension. So I think that it's interesting. And if you go back, even if you're interested in the urban as material, you go back to Castell's critique of the notion of the urban and his argument, his fights with others in the late 1979, The Myth of the Urban Culture, is a fantastic text, because what he's saying at that point is stop using the term urban to pretend like we can all live together happily ever after, and that the problem is class. So let's talk about class, right? It's not that there are neighborhoods we forgot and they're old, and it's a problem of class. And the reason why some people are poorer is because of class. And then Harvey goes beyond, but I think that there's something here that if you go back and you're interested really in the urban as material, there's so much to be done now at how it picks up, what are the frames that are used, what are the frames that are widely accepted, and what are the frames that become more contentious. And if you just go to the Beirut Madinati page, and you see the post on rent control, and you see what happens when the post on rent control comes out with a position that's not thought too much, you see that suddenly explodes, right? And then if you were on our private chat, you would see that they're killing each other on the private chat. So it's interesting because it tells you that there's no consensus there. So I think there's something nice to be done with the urban as material.
And I don't know which one of the monas has said something about don't go wider, zoom in. there is a work that you need to do on yourself to choose you
The
zoom
most
in.
difficult work.
لأنه zooming in is not a one way to go. You have many possible passes. So maybe we should meet again in September to see which zoom in you have
In
selected.
September.
Are you physically here or?
I'm physically here in September, but in July I'm in Brazil, and in August maybe in Spain. So in September I will be a bit more lost than now.
Maybe you'll have a fresh eye then.
And she's running for the amenity in a workshop with women planners from Spain in early October.
In early October, yeah. No, but feminist urbanism, the group of feminist urbanism. It's a cooperative, a feminist cooperative, and
A good way of really doing it, I don't know how you work, but if you have taken a lot of field notes, is to go to the classic way of printing everything. And you know, and having all the notes, and then starting to read them, and then
pretend.
identify certain themes, and photocopy, cut, group them in folders, and then you just start seeing what you have, and you start seeing like, I have a lot on this, and it takes time and it takes discipline and effort, but Anna, for me it worked a lot. And just understanding what you have, because I'm sure you forgot the classic way of schoolwork.
Thanks a lot for
Thank you.